When I first started working on double unders, they definitely didn't look like this. They looked a lot more like this. And that's because I was jumping way too soon and of course way too high because I just didn't have any understanding of how the timing worked. So in this video, we'll break down exactly when to jump and when to land. We'll also break down the speed of the jump in relation to the speed of the rope rotation. And last but not least, we'll break down how to exit the move in order to get back to just regular single unders. Here's a visual that really helps me to know exactly when to jump. We've all seen two people on a seesaw where one person lands and that propels the other person up in the air. So let's think of tank top guy as the rope clipping the ground, and black t-shirt guy is us, the jumper, being propelled up into the air. And definitely spend a fair amount of time working on this before you move on to the next step. Otherwise, you might look a little like this. Here's another visual that really helps to know exactly when to land. We've all seen somebody catching a ball as they jump into a swimming pool. Think about the moment we catch the ball as the moment the rope strikes the ground, and the moment our feet enter the water is the moment our feet land on the ground. And of course, you want to practice this until it becomes really comfortable before we move on to the next step. All right, now that we've practiced the takeoff and the landing, we're ready to combine the two. You can start this from a standstill like I'm doing here, or if you find it to be a little tricky, you can do some single unders and then go into a double under and then pause. The next logical step would be to do single unders, do one double under, and then rather than stopping, go right back into single unders. Do that a few times and then build into two double unders, going right back to single unders. So in theory, that makes a lot of sense. However, for me, I had no idea how to slow down the rope, and I just kept tripping on it and getting really frustrated. So here are a couple exit strategies that we can do in order to get back to our single unders. In this first example, rather than immediately going back to single unders, let's exit the move by doing a few side swings. Of course, we don't want to rely on side swings in order to get back to single unders. So you guessed it, we've got another visual to learn how to slow down the rope. If you've ever been on an airplane, I'm sure you've noticed that when the plane comes in for a landing, the flaps on the plane lift up in order to help slow down the plane. So let's emulate this by simply pulling the handles upward. So let's take a look at this in action. When we're doing regular single unders, if I pause it right here, notice the handles are not pointing straight up. But as I exit the double under right here, now we are pointing the handles straight up. So in real time, it's a very quick move. You don't notice it, but if we slow it down, right there, you see it points up. And this will definitely slow down the rope just enough so that you can get back to regular single unders without tripping on the rope. So obviously our big goal here is to learn how to do consecutive double unders. Even though I was starting to understand the timing for knowing when to jump and when to land, and I was able to do the occasional double under and get right back to single unders, there were still some timing issues that needed to be sorted out. I noticed that I didn't have a deep understanding of just how fast or slow the rope needs to be moving in relation to how fast or slow that we jump. So what I decided to do was just jump as slow as I can and then turn on a metronome and move that metronome up and down until it was matching the speed of my jump. And after a little bit of trial and error, I found that my natural speed is 100 BPM. The next step was to determine if I was able to rotate the rope at 200 BPM. So here's an example using alternate footstep. In this example, we're going to do 8 rotations of the rope doing double unders, and then we're going to do 8 rotations of the rope doing single unders. Notice that in both examples, the sound of the rope clipping the mat is always on with the metronome. Here's the previous example in slow motion. So let's talk about penguin jumps. There's two things that I absolutely love about this drill. Number one, we're 100% guaranteed to not whip ourselves with the rope. And number two, it helps us to learn how to move our wrist 2 times to every 1 time that we jump. The traditional way of doing penguin jumps is to jump up, quickly tap our hips twice, and then land. So when we look at this split screen, it looks like both clips are perfectly in sync with one another. However, if we slow this down and add the metronome, we'll notice that the sound of my hands tapping my hips are not in sync with the metronome or the rope. And because of this, I got really good at doing penguin jumps, but I still couldn't do double unders. As we learned earlier, the rotation of the rope and the sound of the rope clipping the floor needs to remain very steady. So here's another slow motion example of penguin jumps, but notice this time that the sound of my hands tapping my hips is perfectly in sync with the metronome and the sound of the rope clipping the floor. Now let's take a look at this clip at full speed. And when you go to practice this, make sure you don't hit yourself as hard as I'm doing right now. It's a complete waste of motion. I just wanted to make sure that the sound was audible. All right, so before we wrap things up, I just wanted to show a close-up in slow motion of the takeoff and the landing. So notice that as the rope is coming around, my feet are preparing for the takeoff. I'm on my tippy toes, and the rope is just clipping the ground. Again, this is our signal to jump. And when the rope clips the ground again, this is our signal to land. And it's definitely worth mentioning that it's okay to jump a little bit before the rope clips the ground. I noticed that when I was preparing this segment and I was doing the freeze frame, sometimes I would jump just before the rope clipped the ground. The main thing is to not jump too soon, otherwise you're going to trip on the rope when you're trying to do the landing. Well, that about wraps things up. I hope that the tips in this video help you with your timing and get you on the road to crushing double unders.